Who are the scariest teams in the college football landscape? And I want to give this preface at the top of this thing. This is not just like a front runner segment. Like Texas, obviously, they're scary for everyone. Quinn Ewers, no Quinn Ewers, they're scary. They're one of the most complete teams in the country. They're number one right now for a reason. Like, yeah, Texas is scary. Ohio State, haven't played anybody. I'm not worried about that at all. They are a monster kind of operation. Could make an argument they have the best roster in college football. Even before they went out and got a Will Howard and a Quinshon Judkins and a Caleb Downs, like they were still going to be stacked because of what they brought back on defense. So, yeah, they're scary. Ole Miss, again, I don't care they haven't played anybody. They haven't allowed a touchdown. I do not care who the other opponent is. You don't allow a touchdown, you're doing something right. Jackson Dart hasn't thrown for less than 370 yards a game just yet. So, yeah, they're rolling right now. College football fans, if you're a sicko, if you're like us, you're watching games till like 1 a.m., make sure you're subscribed right here to the On3 YouTube channel. We appreciate y'all so much in advance. So I give that preface and then give you one of the ultimate front runners, and I'll tell you why I think they're scary. I think Georgia is extra scary because they already got their smelling salt moment out of the way in week 3. And you give a Georgia team kind of a jolt back to life and show them their mortality like you had them, honestly, a game where you probably could have, would have, should have won that if you're Kentucky. That's scary because Georgia, whenever they have that smelling salt moment, last year it was the game at Auburn. A couple years before it was the Missouri game. Whenever they have that moment now, they sort of recollect themselves and start playing a lot closer to their potential of the roster. It feels like every single year we have this question of, well, hey, is Georgia who we thought they are? Are they who we think they were before the season started? And then Georgia goes out and goes on a run. So the fact that Georgia already had that moment out of the way and won the ball game, and oh, by the way, they get a couple mulligans now in the 12-team playoff. Georgia, I think for those reasons, outside of just being really freaking good, they're one of the scariest teams in college football. Now, Miami is terrifying for the rest of the college football landscape for two main reasons. One, they have a Cristobal-level roster on the lines of scrimmage, both offensively and defensively. We've said it many times. As a head coach, you cannot change where you're from. I'm not talking about geography. I'm talking, and though Mario Cristobal is from Miami, so that doesn't hurt things, I'm talking about where you played at. Like Mario Cristobal was an offensive lineman. The line of scrimmage is near and dear to his heart. So it has been a priority since getting to Coral Gables to have that up to par. Now with guys like Francis Mauanoa, Ruben Bain, they're a lot closer to that, and they're playing like it in year 3 under Cristobal. And then arguably the differentiating factor here is they have a complete psychopath at quarterback in Cam Ward. And I say that in the most affectionate way possible. I actually Googled, hey, what actually is a psychopath? I don't want to just throw this term out there willy-nilly. The definition that I found was extreme lack of empathy. You watch Cam Ward, that first game of the year. I know they haven't played anybody since. I don't care that they did numbers against Ball State and Florida A&M. Like, I'm not worried about those games. Talk about the game against Florida. He walked into the swamp and took that thing over. And again, I keep saying this just had such a cold-blooded approach to it. He's like walking out of bounds. Like, that's very, very different. There's a different level of swag than we've seen at the U for a while now. But the thing is, we've seen it before. We've seen that competitive edge. We've seen that we're the boss kind of approach from them before. That was back in like early 2000s in the 80s. I'm not saying the U is back because we're not really into the whole we're back culture, but I do think Miami is terrifying for the rest of college football, and Cam Ward is a massive reason why because of how he has that team operating. Now here's kind of a sleeper scary team, if you will. I think Nebraska is really scary. If you want to push back on that, that's fine. But the reason why I think they're scary is because we don't even know who they are just yet. And I'm not sitting here telling you Nebraska's going to win the Big Ten. I'm not telling you they're making the college football playoff. I think both those things are probably a year away, maybe 2 years away. But like the fact that we don't know what they are, and more importantly, the fact that Nebraska apparently is no longer beating themselves. Knock on wood, you're averaging half a turnover a game, which is good for top 15 in America. We always said this. If Nebraska would stop beating themselves and giving the ball away like it was Halloween on trick-or-treating, like just you get a turnover, you get a turnover, you get a turnover, knock on the door, you get a turnover. If they would stop doing that, Nebraska has a chance. Okay? Like you try to piece back together your season if you're a Nebraska fan from a year ago, and you're like, hey, 5-1 score games. If we don't give the football away, maybe we're a 10-win team. And it sounds sort of ridiculous when you say it before the next season because you're like, yeah, okay, good luck with that. But Nebraska right now is doing what they were asked to do a year ago going into this year. And Dylan Raiola, obviously, I think his ceiling, or the lack thereof, is what makes them even more terrifying as the year goes on. So not calling my shot for Nebraska to be the team that comes out of the Big Ten or telling you to make the playoff, but I am saying Nebraska, with all that they have in-house now and that maturity they've shown and not beating themselves, they're going to be a very difficult out. Very, very difficult out. And they play teams like Ohio State, play teams like USC. They may very well be one of those teams that sort of ruins one of the other team's chances to make the college football playoff. Speaking of teams that, have done what we've asked them to do, the what if around USC was always, well, what if they get a defense? What if they start playing a better, more physical brand of football over there? It looks like that what if is turning into a they do. Small sample size. I don't want to crown them after just 2 games because they haven't played since the Utah State game they want to buy last week. But, we see a temperature change. We see more violence get into the football. We see better tackling. We see Lincoln Riley apparently has another quarterback in Miller Moss who can sling the ball around the yard. So right now I'm seeing in a very, very early part of the year, USC, if they have that defense that ends up being maybe not elite, but good enough, USC is going to be terrifying. They're going to be very, very tough to beat, and I think they're definitely going to be in that college football playoff conversation this week against Michigan. We'll talk more about this later, but this week against Michigan is going to be a very good litmus test for us, I believe, on how far along that Trojan defense is, especially on the physicality side on the defensive line. Now, Tennessee, they may be the scariest team on this list. Georgia probably being excluded from that conversation, but we know what Georgia is. The thing that's terrifying to me is they now have a defensive line, not just that first level, or that first unit, but the twos as well. They have real depth on the defensive line that I think can go toe-to-toe with the Georgias of the world, the Alabamas of the world, whoever else they end up seeing in the college football playoff. And that was sort of always the thing if you were a Tennessee fan you were trying to account for. Like you talk about Josh Heupel's offense, and you talk about how many points you're going to score, and you say, well, if we score enough points, we kind of minimize how much the trench play actually matters for those other teams. Well, now you're at this point where you got a generational player at quarterback, I believe, in Nico Iamaleava. He keeps trending the way that he trends. This offense looks a lot like it did in 2022. But then you pair that defense up front with it. I don't think you have to squint that hard to see Tennessee in Atlanta playing for the SEC title. And I understand this game this weekend's a massive part of that. But, if Tennessee splits the Georgia and Alabama games, one, you'd be throwing a party in Knoxville. That's first of all. Second of all, I don't know who else you're losing to. Knock on wood. Again, I don't think it's quite the stretch that maybe we anticipated it could be before the year at SEC Media Days for Tennessee, not just to make the playoff, but to be right in the mix to win the darn conference, right? And I feel pretty good about saying that. Now, one more team that I think is scary right now is Kansas State. In the Big 12, man, they don't get enough love, and when they do get love, it's towards Utah and Oklahoma State. They got a big game this weekend. They got a salty defense, does Kansas State, bringing back 80% production from last year's unit that only allowed 17 points a game. But the key factor for me when I talk about Kansas State being dangerous, Avery Johnson, I know it's his first year out there. I understand that. There might be some growing pains still, but if you watch that game last Friday night against Arizona, that is a dude now in number 2 who any Saturday, he could just put on the cape and say, hey, you know what? Yes, you have this matchup that favors y'all. You have this on defense that favors y'all. On paper, y'all should win this game. But guess what? Throw on the red cape, pulls back the number 2. It's the S under the jersey. He could just be Superman and change the game for Kansas State. I think he's that good running the football. And that obviously puts defenses in a bind with defending the pass as well, because if you commit too much to Avery Johnson, there's some room on the back end. Kansas State now, over the course of the last 3 weeks, I've become a lot more of a believer in what they're doing out there in Manhattan. So some scary teams across the country now. Not a front-runner segment, but some teams now that I think we got to keep an eye on as this year progresses that I believe will absolutely factor into this college football playoff discussion. If you've been paying attention to the YouTube show that you're watching right now, our folks at Huel taking care of us. I've started drinking it this time, or this week rather. Absolutely loved it. Running late, no time for breakfast, and you're starving. We've all been there, racing to meetings, practice, school pickups, whatever it is. But what if a delicious, nutritious meal could be ready in seconds This podcast, The Hard Count, is sponsored by Huel, the world's #1 complete nutrition brand with over 400 million meals sold worldwide. Yes, you heard that right, 400 million. Huel is trusted by millions of people looking to fuel their days with convenient, complete nutrition. Try it for yourself with my exclusive offer, 15% off with code HARDCOUNT at Huel.com. Fuel your best with Huel today.